The bells had not rung for triumph. They tolled like iron hearts, slow and arrhythmic, each sound shivering through the scorched courtyards and the soot-caked teeth of the Red Keep. Gulls wheeled beyond Aegon's high walls, and the narrow sea swung its leaden shoulder against the quays beneath. And the wind smelled of ash, tar, and old bread. Someone had burned a wagon of loaves during the taking of the city. The smell lingered, sweet and bitter together, and on certain gusts it made men think of breakfast and home until they looked down and remembered the color of the stones. Jaime Lannister stood in the White Sword Tower and watched the yard below through a slit window. He could see where the old drill square was pocked with scorches, where ballista bolts had plowed furrows as if they were farmers in a field of flagstones. Below him, the armorer's little boy pushed a broom much larger than himself, earnest as a squire, chasing ash into placid heaps that the wind undid as soon as the boy's back turned. Somewhere nearer the kitchens, a dog barked and refused to stop. Iron clanged on iron. He could tell the sound of good steel from bad, and there were many poor edges in King's Landing now. The Lannister forges had gone quiet. The Tyrell wagons were gone. The sellswords that had lingered after the sack took their pay indoors, torn from hinges, bottles, and women's bracelets. Stannis Baratheon had no songs and offered few speeches. He had left the watchwords of the new order to his hand. Jaime flexed his left fingers until the ache changed shape and became something he could grip. The right was a shining thing he had learned to move around rather than with, a gaudy lump of a reminder that men could be made ornamental before they were made useless. The weight of it pulled at his shoulder if he forgot himself and swung too freely. In sunlight, his golden hand was bright as a mirror. In the dimness of morning, it looked like a dull coin, handled by too many hands. He drew the waster from the rack and stepped into the center of the empty practice chamber. The floorboards remembered the feet of better men. He could hear the forgotten scuffs if he listened. The room had the hush of prayer about it in those hours before the castle had finished waking. Jaime set his stance and lifted the wooden blade. The balance felt true. He had learned to cheat the mirror his body had become. How to twist his hips to give the left arm reach. How to move first with his feet, so that the arm followed rather than led. Work that had once been music was now arithmetic. Angles counted. Distances added. The sums of each stroke checked twice. He cut from high and the air hissed. He did not count his repetitions. Counting belonged to monks and hungry men. Jaime worked until the muscles at the base of his neck crawled and his left hand trembled. He paused only when he tasted iron at the back of his throat. When he lowered the waster, the window had gone from gray to pale. Voices rose in the yard. He heard the cough and scuff of new recruits who had not yet learned to stand still when shouted at. He heard a set of footsteps on the stairs that were soft as cat paws until they were close, and then a knuckle rapped the door. "Sir Jaime?" said a voice that held salt and a lifetime of wind in it. "Come," he said, and laid the waster aside as if it were a real sword that might have feelings about being thrown. Davos Seaworth eased in. He had a face chiseled by weather and worry, and his hand, well, his was a true hand, but missing pieces. The comparison was too easy. Jaime kept his face clear of it. Davos had the hand's brooch pinned to his breast, a starburst of pale metal that was almost shy beside the fierceness of the man who wore it. "The king will speak with you," Davos said. He never called him Your Grace. He did not need reminding whom the crown was on. A ship's crew remembers the captain without banners. Jaime pulled on his cloak. The white was as clean as soap could make it, but the hem was already smudged from stairs, and the clasp had a tiny nick out of one edge where it had struck stone. He smoothed the cloth purely to give his hands a task. "He is a man of early mornings." "He is a man of most hours," Davos said, and there was no reverence in the words, only the observation of a sailor noting wind and tide. "You look steady on that arm." "I look," Jaime said, "like a man who remembers when he did this better." Davos' mouth twitched. "Remembrance is a dangerous sea. I advise hugging the coast." He stepped aside to let Jaime pass. They walked down the tower's inner stair, one of those that widened on the outer curve and made old knights feel young if they were going down and crippled if they were climbing. They crossed the yard. A pair of Stormlanders with their cloaks pinned with crowned stags came to sudden attention. They were broad in the chest and narrow in their tolerances. The sort who wore their loyalty the way an honest trader wore his scales, openly and with a belief that numbers were numbers. They watched Jaime pass with that strange mixture of disdain and curiosity one reserves for a wolf that has agreed to wear a little bell. The throne room had lost some of its silks. Stannis did not like them. The high windows leaked thin spears of light down the walls and struck the iron blades that rose behind the throne in frozen motion, like the teeth of some enormous fish. The pillars kept their shadows, and the braziers burned with their old copper roar. A page, freckled and intent, announced them, though there was no one to hear but the men already in the hall. Stannis sat with his whole body, which was to say he seemed always to be ready to push himself up. He had a narrow warrior's face and a mouth that disliked excess. The crown he wore could have been hammered by a smith in a storm. Simple, shoulders of antler bent into a circle. You could see the blows that had made it. On his right, Melisandre stood with her red hair unbound, the rubies at her throat winking like small eyes. On his left, a chair had been placed for the hand. Davos took it and did not rest his back against it, as if ready to leap to his feet again whenever sense required it. Syrax, or was it Pylos? No, Pylos had died at Dragonstone. The maester here was an older man with a careful beard, and he watched out of the corner of his eye as if truth often came from odd angles. A handful of lords stood scattered like stones left by a receding wave. Lord Estermont with his turtle sigil dull against his breast, a Wensington with his old blue sash, and one hard-looking knight from the Vale, whose name Jaime could not recall but whose wrists were knotted with muscle from the mountains. The hall felt emptier with each passing day. The city had been taken, the work of ordering it was begun, and with every edict, the number of men who wanted to be near the Iron Throne diminished. Honey flies and crows, Jaime thought. Only crows stay when the honey is gone. Sir Jaime, Stannis said, and the words fell like boards into place. Step forward. Jaime did. He knew how to walk in a throne room. One did not look up at the blades too long. Otherwise they found their way down to your throat. One kept one's hands quiet. His golden one flashed as he moved, and he saw the eyes track it. And then he saw men drag their gazes away as if not to be caught staring. He stopped at the right distance. That too, he remembered. There was a king who sat that chair before me, Stannis said. There were others before him. One day, there will be another after me. That is the way of chairs. Men wear them. They do not keep them. He pushed himself up, inevitable as a clock. And yet the realm must be kept. There are things that hold more constant than the man who sits. Oaths, law. He let the last word rest on the stones. He had a way of speaking the word so that it sounded like something that had weight and taste. You have sworn before. You know what a white cloak weighs. You know what it was meant to be and what it became. I know, Jaime said. He had stood in a white cloak with the Targaryen dragon rising behind him like a storm cloud. He had cut a king's throat. He had held a queen with that same hand. Men claimed to hate contradiction, but they fed on it as crows fed on offal. Jaime knew. I know what I did. Aye, Stannis said. And there was something like a short laugh buried alive beneath the word. And the realm knows, though it seldom agrees on what it thinks about it. I am not here to like you, Lannister. I am here to fit the realm with things that will hold. I cannot make your past untrue. I can make your present costly to you and useful to me. You have a talent for generosity, Jaime said lightly. He only half meant it. The barbs of Stannis' kindness were its truth. Davos' eyes flicked to Jaime. The hand wore worry like some men wore knives, hidden in a sleeve and ready to use. The king intends to be plain, Davos said. The city knows your skill. The city knows your sins. The city needs the first and likes to say it despises the second. Both are true. He will give you white and ask you to make it mean something again. Melisandre's smile was slow as an oil fire. Light burns most bright on soiled cloth, she said. It shows its power by what it remakes. Jaime looked at the red woman, then away. He had learned where not to rest his eyes. The last time I swore to a king, I saved the city by breaking it. The last time you swore to a king, Stannis said. You swore to a man who would have burned 10,000 children to warm his hands. I do not love you for what you did, Lannister, but I do not call it senseless. I call it law that the Seven Kingdoms should be kept. If we must all be judged only by our purest oath, there would be no men left in any brotherhood. He gestured, and a page brought forward a folded thing. The boy's hands shook. At moments like that, Jaime remembered he was frightening. You will put this on in the sight of those assembled. You will kneel where oaths have been said and broken, including by you. You will speak, and then you will stand. And then we will see if your oaths can bend toward something better than your appetites. For your sake. For mine. For the realms. Lannister. Do you fear, Jaime said, that my presence poisons the office? It was not entirely a jape. He heard the ghosts rustle in the high fans of the hall, heard them lean close in case they were to be named. I fear everything that can be feared, Stannis said, but without heat. I answer fear by measuring. There are measures which bind men more tightly than chains. You have spoken your defiance to law and your obedience to family. You say yes to both while believing yourself singular for having to hold them both at once. You are not singular. You merely had a sharper blade to hand. He nodded, and Davos rose, and the boy with the cloak took 3 quick steps forward and 2 timid ones back, and finally reached Jaime's hands. The cloak smelled of cedar and lye. Jaime set his jaw and lifted it. He did not ask for help. He swung it over his shoulders and felt the way the cloth pulled when it settled. How it altered his stance simply by being. He let the weight fold into him. He went to his knee on the flagstones before the Iron Throne. His right hand shone dully against the floor. He had knelt here once before, a golden boy with 2 good hands and a storm in his chest. Aerys had laughed and called him pretty. Say the words, Stannis told him. Jaime breathed ash and old incense and the faint mustard tang of rust. He said the words. His voice was not as smooth as once it had been, but it carried. He promised his life and his nights and his days. He promised to keep the king's secrets and guard his body and his honor, to obey, to counsel truthfully, to forego lands and children, and all the rooted comforts that make men complacent and corruptible. The words had the taste of old wine turned to vinegar. They had the taste of medicine. He did not pretend this time he did not know what he was swallowing. He said them anyway. When he stood, Stannis had not smiled. He did not now. He nodded once, the way a craftsman nods at a joint that fits, and then he said in a voice for the hall to hear, Rise, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. The title crossed the air like a thrown thing and hit the stones and lay there. Jaime found that it did not bounce. He rose to it. The cloak on his shoulders shifted and settled. He turned. He saw in the faces that watched a half-dozen realms. He saw the Stormlands stiffen, the Veil Man narrow his eyes. The Maester memorize, Melisandre look as if she had indeed lit a lamp. He saw Davos' face soften a fraction, which for that man was the equivalent of applause. He felt, for an absurd heartbeat, the desire to glance at the place where a woman would have stood once to watch him. He steadied himself by refusing. Afterward there was no feast. Stannis did not understand feasts the way other kings did. He broke his fast in a side chamber with bread that crackled when you tore it, salted herring, and a pot of tea that had grown weak by its 3rd pour. Davos ate like a former smuggler, efficiently, without suspicion and without hurry. Melisandre ate like a woman making a point that food was less than fire. Jaime ate well enough. He had known hunger once, and it had not made him philosophical. You will choose brothers, Stannis said between 2 mouthfuls of fish. 4 are gone and 2 are unfit to wear white. You will dismiss them. You will make them hear why. You will write in the white book and make it mean something again. You will drill the men and bring order to the gold cloaks. Their captains rot. They must be scraped. They smell. He took another bite, chewed, swallowed. You will keep the queen who calls herself mother from making mischief while she awaits judgment. Jaime held the crust of bread too hard until it broke in his left hand. He wiped the crumbs from his palm and set them into a neat little pile, as if that could be the measure of control. I am to guard her cell as well as your crown. You are to guard the realm, Stannis said. "In this hour she is part of the realm. That is the pity of it." Davos' eyes were on him. The hand's look had no malice. It had a sort of stern pity that made Jaime want to hurl his cup. "If there is trouble," Davos said gently, "you will come to me first. You have my word on that. I know what it is to have a past that men spit at. The king believes a man can be measured by what he does next. He measures himself that way as well." "And you," Jaime said to the Red Woman, "how do you measure men?" "In flames," she said, "but fear not. I am kinder to them than the world is." He laughed, a single bark. "Kindness from a fire. Fire does not lie," Melisandre said. "If it spares you, you are spared for a reason." He left them and went to the White Sword Tower because his feet knew the way. The stair wound around an old spine of stone and opened into a room that had been built for 7, and was now a memorial for the departed. The great book lay on its stand, a white mountain of pages. The leather cracked in places where generations of fingers had loved it to break in. The room smelled of oiled parchment and the rosewater that some long-dead brother had once sprinkled, so that the memory of glory would come with a sweetness. The table by the window had 7 chairs. He set his hand on the back of the one that had been Gerald Hightower's, felt the gouges where a bored man's knife had marred it, then moved on. He lowered himself into the chair nearest the book and opened it to his own page. Sir Jaime Lannister. Proctum Dei. The script below his name began bravely, and then faltered as the teller had become uncertain about whether to record rumor or leave a blank. The last line written here had been neat and cutting. Fought in the Whispering Wood and taken captive. His mouth thinned. He turned one page back and read with the old hunger. Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. He traced the words with his eyes and not his golden hand. Memory unspooled, warm and dangerous. He turned forward again. There was clean parchment waiting. He took up the quill. His left hand made an awkward claw around it. He had practiced. The letters came out narrow and fierce, which would have pleased Stannis and annoyed his father. Under the old account he wrote, "Under King Stannis Baratheon, I swore again and was made Lord Commander. My oath is the same oath and new in its keeping." He paused, let the ink think, then continued. "Chose no favorites and protected many. Remembered that fear does not keep a king, and love does not either, and so made of duty a third thing that could stand." He nearly laughed at himself. Already, he was writing parables. He blotted the ink and closed the book and stood in the window's square of sun and watched a gull try to swallow a crust too large for its throat. The bird fought it and won. There were lessons everywhere if a man was soft enough to be stung by them. He went down to the yard. The new master-at-arms was a scarred man from Tarth, with a broken nose that leaned like a mast in a stiff breeze. He had come to Stannis with 2 cousins and a sack of oats, when the Stormlands had broken, and he could teach. "Sir," he said, and tossed Jaime a blunted sword, "if you're Lord Commander, you might as well let men see you bleed in the right places." They worked until the sun was higher, and the sweat ran inside Jaime's collar and stung where it found old scars. Men watched, without jeering. Stormlanders respected work. The Tarth man, Sir Harlan, that was the name, had a way of stepping in that used the heel and the shoulder so that a blow could be taken to the ribs without the breath leaving you entirely. He showed Jaime how to turn the golden hand into an anvil to catch a strike and let it glance off, how to make a fist of the ruin and use it to drive a man's blade down to the stones. Jaime learned. He had always learned quickly. It was the pride that had come easily before. Pride was a lazier teacher. Afterward, he ate in the shade of a wall with 3 gold cloaks, who had once followed a man named Alardim, and now made a great show of hating him. Their faces changed when he asked their names. He did not eat with guards very often, and they were easily flattered. One, a man from Cracklaw Point, had a laugh like a gull's scream. Another, the youngest, had a scar through his eyebrow that made every expression into a question. Jaime asked them what corners of the city were likely to riot. They told him, and they were correct. He had learned over wars and weddings that truth often came best from men who had to clean the dirt from under their nails with their teeth. He walked the city that evening in a plain half-cloak, with only a single white thread stitched down its edge. It was enough to keep the rats at heel, and not enough to call every eye. The street of flour was quiet, and not because all were fed. Quiet in that manner had a shape. He saw the little knots where men stood with arms folded watching and not speaking. He saw what windows were shuttered, and which were not. He saw the sept on Rookery Lane where the cobblestones were still stained from, when the Queen's escort had clashed with Stannis men 3 days before. The blood had been scrubbed, but stones remembered. He saw a child with his rib bones showing through his skin eating a fig as if it would take up residence in him like a tenant. A cry rose near the fish market and broke into a dozen smaller cries. Jaime watched a wave begin to form in the street. Not a riot yet, but a gathering whiteness on the tongue of a breaker. He moved toward it with 2 gold cloaks behind him and the gull laugher in front. A fishmonger had hoisted his prices overnight. Some woman had decided she was not the sea and would not be fleeced, and she had thrown a red mullet at his head with impressive accuracy. And then his cousin had struck her across the face with a board. And then there were hands and shouting. The boy with the scarred eyebrow drew his baton with more courage than skill. Jaime stepped between the woman and the board and let the wood glance off his golden hand. The jolt traveled up into his elbow and shoulder. He snapped his left palm against the cousin's wrist, and the board clattered. The fishmonger's mouth opened into a story he was beginning to invent. "No," Jaime said. And he said it the way Stannis said words, as if they had weight. "You will take half your price, and you will make the other half on men who have coin. She will take her fish and her blood, and go home. The next man who lifts a stick will find himself counting teeth by feel." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Authority is a cloak, as much as white wool is. The fishmonger began to remonstrate, and then saw the shine of the hand in the dusk, and forgot his remonstrance. The woman's cheek was going to swell. He took a silver stag from his belt and placed it in her palm. He saw the way her eyes widened as if he had given her a map to a warm country. The crowd broke like foam. It was not victory. It was only a delay. Delays were victories in cities. By the time he climbed the tower again, it was full dark. He went to the cells below without admitting to himself that he was going to the cells. The underhalls of the Red Keep had been designed by men who feared the sun. The air tasted of iron and old wool. Torches guttered in brackets that had not been polished in a generation. The jailers were men who wore their boredom like armor. They looked up when he passed and then looked down quickly. He reached the door he had not intended to reach and stopped with his palm on the wood. He did not open it. He stood with his ear near the crack. He heard nothing within. The silence pushed against his ear like a sleeping cat. He closed his eyes and tried to remember how Cersei had sounded when she slept. He could not. He remembered how she sounded when she lied. He took his hand from the door and stood a little longer, and then turned and walked away. In his chambers, the white cloak hung like a ghost on its hook and watched him as he undressed. He poured water from a flagon and scrubbed his face until his skin was hot. The bed was narrower than the one he had used as a Lannister and firmer. He sat on its edge and found that he was very tired. When he lay down, the darkness was an ocean and the pillow a plank of wood. He drifted. Dreams came. They were not Jaime's friends. He saw green. He always saw green, the liquid choir of wildfire, undulating beneath the city like a secret ocean. Aerys laughed with black teeth. He turned, and it was not Aerys, but a boy with golden hair and a painted crown. And Joffrey said something cruel and small that made men want to do great crimes. He looked to where Cersei would stand, and she was not there. And the place she should have been was full of the smell of cold. He reached for his sword, and his hands were both perfect and slick, and when he looked down, the slickness was not blood but milk. He woke with his heart hammering, and found the room perfectly plain and perfectly still. The window had turned gray again. He had slept an hour. He swallowed water and stood. The first work of the morning would be dismissal. He dreaded it more than battle, and exactly as much as confession. Men made a living at wearing white, who had forgotten why they had put it on. He did not intend to make a spectacle of them, but he would not permit them to hide behind his cloak. He dressed and fastened the clasp with care, and went to find the two he would cast out. One, a man who had taken coin from a wine cellar to look the other way while a cart of girls passed. The second, a peacock, who had never learned the names of the stones he walked on. They came when summoned and stood like boys playing at soldiers. Jaime told each what he had done and told them what would be written in the book. The peacock turned a charming shade of sallow and began to speak of misunderstandings. Jaime held up his golden hand, and the words died, as if the hand had caught them by their throats. "You swore," Jaime said. "You did not keep." He cut their cloaks. White wool fell to the floor in halves. The room felt colder when he was done. He gave each man a day to be gone. Men needed a day. It permitted them to pretend that leaving was a choice. He sent for candidates, and his table became a ship crowded with small banners. A Stormlander who had never lost a duel, but who had also never fought one that mattered. A quiet man from Sunspear with a scar that crawled from ear to collarbone like a pale worm. A knight of the Vale with blue eyes that did not move much. A square-shouldered crackhall who could have been kin if the gods had played lightly with names. He asked each about oaths, and each answered as if reciting lessons. He asked each what he had done when his lord had been wrong. That separated the wheat from the husk. The man from Sunspear told him of a day his prince had ordered him to set torches in a ville, because the lord who held it had spoken out of turn. The Sunspear man had sent boys ahead to pull the old and the infants from the houses before the fire took hold. He did not speak of it to burnish himself. He spoke of it as of an ache in the weather. Jaime set that name aside on a clean piece of vellum. At midday, Shireen Baratheon came with her nurse and a man in motley who jangled faintly when he moved. The girl had the half-smile of someone who has found a way to live with something. She had skin marked like old riverbeds on one cheek and at her throat, and eyes as steady as any lord's. She had a book in her hands. The nurse bobbed. The motley man bobbed lower than was warranted, and Shireen said, "Sir Jaime, my lord father says you keep a book of your own. I have brought mine so we can exchange." "My lady," Jaime said, and bowed without making a show of it. "What do you read?" "Histories," she said. "Of Aegon, of Maegor, of Baelor who starved himself, which is foolish, of Queen Nymeria and her ships." She hugged the book post, a habit from childhood she had not entirely outgrown. "Patchface says I should not read too much or words will leak from my ears at night, but the maester says that is not how ear holes work." Patchface rolled his eyes and made a face of words falling from an ear and puddling on the floor. Jaime found himself smiling, then was annoyed with himself, and then annoyed at the annoyance. "In my book, the words do not leak," he told the girl. "I think they fight." "Do they win?" she asked. "Some do," he said. "I hope the true ones." She nodded as if that satisfied some private ledger. "May I see it?" He took her to the stand. The nurse made a soft cluck, and then quieted when she saw how gently the girl set her hands. Shireen read with the seriousness of a steward counting casks. "Here you are," she said, pointing to the new lines. "You have very neat letters for a left hand." "I had ugly letters for a long time," Jaime said. "I learned to be patient with the pen. It does not run just because I am angry." She looked up at him with a surprising shrewdness. "Do you think that is true for swords?" "It can be," he said. "Some days." Melisandre passed the doorway as they stood there. The Red Woman did not enter. Her gaze slid along the room the way fire licks a wick before committing itself. Jaime felt a prickle along his neck and wondered if he wore it like a child wearing worry. He stood no straighter than he had before, and yet he felt seen and weighed. In the evening he went to the Sept. It was a place he had not often visited when the city had been his in deed, if not in law. Now he stepped inside because there were only so many places where a man who had killed a king could be alone without being entirely alone. The candles had been replaced with tallow, which smoked and left little curls of soot along the ceiling like hard writing. He stood before the stranger, and then before the warrior, and considered that the best gods were those that refused to meet your eye in mercy. The Septon on duty was a tired man with a bruise on his cheekbone, and nothing in his mouth that smelled like wine. Jaime asked nothing of him, and the man gave him nothing, and there was a strange cleanliness in the exchange. He returned to the tower by a different stair, and found a letter waiting on his table, unsealed. Someone had written his name in a hand that thought itself calligraphy. He opened it with his teeth. Some days, his golden hand was less than a knife, and read, "Sir Jaime, I am told my life will depend upon what men write about me in their books. If this is so, mine is a poor hope. Still, I am a mother, and I hope even when hope is a hanged man. If you will come, come. If you will not, do not. But come. See." The sea hunched on the page like a woman in a cell. He set the letter down and sat again, and listened to his blood. It spoke in waves. He could hear the pull. He could almost see the shape the pull might make if he let it. He stood quickly as if he could flee his own body. He crossed to the window and looked out. The sea had darkened to slate. A ship with a single lamp moved away from the quay, its light jerking as a man carries a bucket with a broken handle. The wind had shifted. He could smell rain. He went to the white book again because its pages could not command him, and yet compelled. He opened to a man whose name was not one of the famous ones. A Kingsguard who had served through a long, dull reign and done nothing but stand at doors and lend his steel to quarrels that were never written about in poems. The lines were short, but they were steady. He traced them with his finger and did not know if he was consoling himself or setting a trap he could live inside. When he slept this time, it was deep and filled with nothing. He woke to rain drumming like fingers on the sill. The day began before he rose. Men moved, water fell. A king measured. Jaime dressed and fastened his clasp and went to his work. He began with the gold cloaks, not with punishments, but with shoes. Men who stand and move are better and more honest when their feet do not rot. He found barrels of oil and had them opened, and ordered men to sit on their heels and oil their boots until shine could repel water. He walked the lines when men changed watches, and he watched eyes. He saw where fear made eyes too wide, and where boredom made them too narrow. He made notes. He sent a boy with a message to Davos about a captain he would like gone. The boy returned with a silent nod from the hand. It was a clean exchange. At midday, a lord from the Vale with soft hands and a fierce hawk on his surcoat came to sneer politely at the king's choice of white. Jaime listened to the little speech and said nothing until the man ran out of cleverness and began to repeat himself. "When you are through," Jaime said, "I will find out if your swords know as many words as your mouth." The Vale Lord left and took his hawk's thin dignity with him. Jaime did not follow. He had work. Near the hour of evensong, Melisandre found him again in the yard. The rain had gentled to pins of silver. The red woman's hair darkened where the water touched it, and the rubies at her throat had become embers caught out in a storm. She looked at him as if she were seeing a mark someone else had chalked on his back. "You walked past a door last night," she said. "I walked past several doors," he answered. "That is the nature of halls. Some doors lead to cellars," she said. "Some lead to rivers even when they are not near one. You have the smell on you of a man who can be led by cracks in the floor." "Then? If you meant to warn me," he said, "you should have done it when I was younger." She smiled, not unkindly. "Fire is very old," she said. "It has patience." He left her and did not look back, and found himself once more in the room with the book and the chairs for 7. Rain whispered against the stones. He pulled a candle closer, and its runnel of wax bent toward his hand. He drew a new vellum list. Candidates for white. Men who had bent in the right places when tested by lords who had meant ill. He placed the Sunspear man first. He added a Stormlander with a scar at his lip, who had once given his rations to a boy and taken the boy's beating himself, rather than see the child branded. He wrote a name he did not expect to write. A northern knight who had come as part of the embassy that had ridden through the city like winter rumors. A man with a quiet way of standing and a sword that had seen honest oil. He stopped there, not out of scarcity, but because a man must not drown himself in the work that is meant to keep him afloat. Night moved along the walls like a cat. He rose and stood by the window, feeling the stone cold through his sleeves. Lightning showed him the city for a heartbeat, too bright, too plain. The hills like sleeping beasts, the black line of the river, the sept domes like upturned bowls, the mud gate's teeth, all of it old and small in the flash. He thought of the boy in the yard with the broom half his height. He thought of Stannis measuring law like a man measuring rope, precise and with calluses. He thought of Devos missing fingers and the way the hand did not seem to find them missing at all. He thought of a door he had not opened. He thought of a woman who stood on the other side of it like a letter's last line. He did not go down. At dawn, he placed 3 names on the king's table. Stannis read them without comment. Davos lifted one eyebrow at the Northern Knight's name and then lowered it. Melisandre watched the steam rise from Stannis' tea. "These will do," the king said. "If they do not do, they will be undone. You will then do again, better. The realm is a rope," Jaime said, impulsive. "We make knots in it and hope they hold." "The realm is a ship," Davos said, and smiled faintly. "We make sails and pray for wind." "The realm is wood and oil," Melisandre said. "We make a fire and hope we are not consumed before we are warmed." Stannis did not indulge metaphors. He signed. He looked up at Jaime. "Your first parade of the new white will be in a week. Until then you will drill until men think you are wooden. You will remove the last of the kettle-black vermin from the gold cloaks. You will keep the cell doors closed." "They." Jaime inclined his head and did not ask which door Stannis meant. He left the chamber with the paper warmth of appointment in his hand, and the colder weight of the white cloak on his shoulders, and the coldest weight of all in the hollow place, where habits go when you wrench them out by their roots. The yard waited, and the city, and the book. He would fill it with deeds, or else the blankness would outlive him and put its mouth to the ears of boys yet unborn, and tell them what he had failed to do. When a man is young, the day wraps around him like a gauntlet, and he thinks he can punch his way through it. When he is older, he learns that the day is water, and he must learn to swim without drowning, and without pretending. He is not in a sea. Jaime went to the yard and took up his waster and set his feet, and felt the ground under him with care. He struck and parried and turned his shoulder over and over, while the bells tolled some different hour, and the gulls argued and the rain came on again in sheets so fine they felt like breath. He worked until the ache in his arm was the only honest thing, and then he worked a little more. The rain made a quiet in the yard that men obeyed without knowing why. It stitched a veil between one figure and the next, softened the edges of brick and blade, and made the footfalls of men sound like the sea. Jaime kept at the practice square until the mud grabbed at his boots, and the wooden blade felt swollen in his hand. Sir Harlan of Tarth circled him without hurry, tapping the guard of his own waster with one finger as if coaxing music from an instrument. "Again?" Harlan said. Jaime stepped, turned the shoulder, let the false hand catch the cut as Harlan's sword came down, and rolled his weight so that the blow slid away with a shiver down the golden plating into the meat of his forearm. The jolt was familiar now. Pain, but a counted pain, like tally marks carved into a beam. He answered with a rising cut that would have been prettier once. It was merely true now. Harlan's waster thumped against his ribs as payment for a late hip. Jaime grunted, not displeased to have a debt he could note and discard. When they were done, Harlan tossed him a cloth and pointed with his chin toward the arch where the gold cloaks were gathering, a string of dull yellow beads in the rain. "They'll watch you if you don't look like you want them to," the Tarth man said. "They see you sweat. They'll trust that the sweating they do is not an insult. They'll watch me whatever I do," Jaime said, wiping rain from his face. "The city is an old woman at a window. It cannot not watch." Harlan's nose had been broken 2 ways, and each way had taught him something about not wasting breath. Then let it see a thing worth seeing. By noon the rain had gentled, and the oiling of boots had turned the barracks into a tannery. Barrels stood open like gaped mouths. Men sat on their haunches, working oil into cracked leather with penitent care. The smell of tallow and damp wool in men was as honest as any psalm. Jaime moved along the lines and listened to the small talk that men thought could not be heard. Complaints about a captain who took 3 coppers off each head on watch rotation. Talk of a woman on the Street of Sisters who sold stew so thin you could see the bottom of your troubles in it. A laugh about a boy who had greased his boot soles so well he slid down 3 steps and broke his dignity. He made notes as he went, mostly names. When he came to the captain who had shaved coin, the man's mouth hardened as if a lemon had been placed upon his tongue. "We count pay," Jaime said mild. "Count it now, with me watching, and we'll discover if the numbers change by the simple presence of my eyes." The numbers changed. The man's face changed to match them. Jaime relieved him of his baton. He did not raise his voice. The men did not cheer. They did not need to. Relief has a way of moving without sound. Messages moved more quickly than men. By the time he climbed the Red Keep's inner stair to the Hand's solar, Davos had already heard. The Hand stood by a window that looked north, where the city thinned and grew poor. He had that sailor's habit of making the horizon an ally. "Ser Osmond is in the cells 3 levels down," Davos said without preface. "Osfrid is gone. Either he has a friend left in the city, or he thinks we are fools. I will hope for the first, because you have cured me of expecting the second." "Kettleblacks breed like rats in a granary," Jaime said, taking the towel Davos handed him to dry his hair. "They came with my sister like varnish comes with a table. You can scrape, but the smell lingers." He did not apologize for the metaphor. Stannis would have by frowning it to death. Davos allowed it to stand, as he allowed weather to stand. "Let me speak to Osmond," Jaime went on. "He enjoys the hearing of his own lies. I have a use for that." They took no retinue. A man is more likely to preen when there are not too many eyes to steal his audience. The cells under the keep were cold without dignity. The torches coughed. A jailer with a broken tooth and a decent soul clanked open the door. Inside, Ser Osmond Kettleblack was a ruined painting. A man whose charm had been abraded by too much handling. He had an eye like a bruised plum and a smile that had done better work in better years. "Sir," he said to Jaime, making the word seem a compliment to himself. "I've worn white, like yourself. I know how heavy it hangs when a man wants to move fast." "You wore white, the way a crab wears barnacles," Jaime said. "The thing clung, and you took pride in the clinging." Osmond shrugged. "A man makes a living with what he has. Some have better hands than others." He looked pointedly at the golden weight on Jaime's wrist, then up again quickly when the jest found no purchase. "It's a new day, I see. New king, new coin. I can be new." "Be true," Davos said simply. "Truth is a habit." Jaime found he sounded like an older man. Perhaps the one his father had imagined he could have been, if he had not been born to mock gods. "You can take it up, but you will itch." He pulled the stool closer and sat. Hips canted so the left leg could push him up easily if need called. "Where does Osfrid run?" "Where men like us run," Osmond said. "To the place where our folly started and our luck ended. To a woman, to coin, to a man who thinks himself cleverer than the king." He tapped the side of his nose and winced as bruised cartilage protested. "He goes to a cellar on the hook where salt meat is kept as if it were gold. He goes to where a boat can be caught at an hour when the watch sleeps." He spread his hands to display their emptiness, and the chain at his wrists clinked, as if agreeing with him. "Let me fetch him for you. I have a face that does not frighten fools." "You have a face that frightens me and amuses liars," Jaime said. "You do not leave this cell except to the headman. If you are of use, it will be because something you say accidentally shames the truth into showing itself." "And now?" Davos' mouth twitched. Approval from him looked like a man almost remembering a song. "We will set a net," he said to Jaime. "Not too fine. The man is not a minnow. He can break cheap string." They set their net in the manner of men who had done such things before. A boat at the hook with a sail patched in the pattern of an orange, which was a signal agreed between thieves and smugglers when neither wished to name the other. 2 gold cloaks in river-stained cloaks, who looked like men too poor to be guards and too hungry to be cowards. Sir Harlan at the end of a lane where a man fleeing might find what he did not expect. And Jaime, later than the rest, moving along the quay with a fisherman's hat, dragging his hair down in rat tails, watching more with ears than eyes. Rain scribbled on the river. The lamps of the city drew crooked lines upon the black. Osfrid came as a man comes when the story he has told himself is better than the truth. He had a hood low and a swagger high and a purse that gave itself away by tapping against his hip with each careless stride. 2 men moved with him. neither Kettleblack by blood, though the manner of the walk said they would have taken the name if Coin had offered it. Jaime stepped into their path at the same time as the two river cloaks folded around their backs, and he saw the calculus move across Osfried's face. Fight here and make a scene, or fight there and be contained, or run and be caught where the nets had more patient knots. Osfried chose to be stupid, like a man chooses a song he knows all the words to. The first swing came at Jaime's head, and he let the golden hand take it. The shock up his arm snapped his teeth together. His left swung and found the meat under a shoulder. His boot moved, and the knee it met remembered humility. Sir Harlan came out of the lane as if the stones had grown him, and the men from Rivercloak did good honest work with their batons, choosing hands and wrists rather than heads. In a little while, Osfried Kettleblack lay grunting into the wet boards of the quay, while the orange-patched sail bobbed a little farther out. Then Comfort liked and then trimmed and turned away, when the watchers on it read the sudden quiet for what it was. They took Osfried alive, because living men have longer to be useful. In the cell, he spat a tooth into a corner, and had the grace to look briefly around for where the tooth had landed, as men will with things they know they cannot reclaim. "I'll give you coin you didn't know you wanted," he said. And Davos, amused, nodded as if a captain had just offered to sell him the tide. "You'll give us names," Jaime said, businesslike. "You will keep nothing back because you are not good at keeping." He listed the names they wanted and the places they belonged, and Osfried spoke like a sieve, letting truth and lie run together, and Davos' ear, trained by a life listening for wind in canvas, caught the moments where the tone altered and the music slipped. By dusk, the Kettleblacks were done in the city. Not all caught, not all punished, but done. Their web had been cut and their flies had fled. It felt less like victory than like walking into a room after a fire and finding the chair still sound. A thing to sit on, not a thing to sing about. Jaime slept that night without dream, and woke to a thin light and the comfort of a plan. He put 2 names in the white book, not as brothers, but as men removed. The page takes ink, whether truth is sweet or bitter. He wrote plainly, with no relish. Sir Osmund Kettleblack, unmade of the Kingsguard for venality and dereliction. Sir Osfried Kettleblack, removed from the city watch for bribery and collusion, taken into custody. The words sat on the page like stones on a grave. He thought of the young men who would one day run their fingers over these lines and make of them a cautionary tale to tell another boy. If the book could be put to such small use and still be true, it would be worth keeping. The candidates came as ordered on the 4th day after his oath. They stood in a line below the tower, rain beaded on pauldrons and lashes. Jaime walked before them with Harlan at his shoulder and 3 gold cloaks who had learned, to their surprise, that standing straight could feel like pride instead of fear. He did not ask each man to brag. He asked them to do small things well. "Unglove your sword hand and put your glove back on without looking down," he said, and waited to see who let haste make fools of fingers. "Take a blow on your off shoulder and keep your feet," he said, and watched who remembered to bend where bone should bend. "Tell me the worst decision your lord ever made and what you did," he said, and listened for anger, for loyalty, for the thing that crouches in the corner between the two. The Sunspear man was younger than Jaime had expected. He had the dark lemonwood eyes and the patience of one who had walked long roads on his own coin. "Sir Endry Dalt," he said simply, and moved as if he had once had a master who hated waste. When asked about his lord's worst decision, he spoke without heat of a summer when the prince had ordered water diverted from a village to fill the cisterns of a fort because an envoy was coming. "I took water out by night and told no one," he said. The fort cisterns looked well enough by day to please the envoy, and he left before he discovered that men could drink the look of water only with their eyes. He did not smile. Jaime wrote his name. The Stormlander with the scarred lip had a farmer's hands and a soldier's attention. "Sir Harwood Fell," he said, "of the Rainwoods." When asked of his lord's folly, he told of a levy raised too quickly when the harvest was not done. "I sent the old home," he said. "We marched slower and we fought fresher." Harlan, Stormlander himself, grunted approval as if through his nose. The Northern Knight wore no badge. He had eyes the gray of old wool, and a manner that did not dramatize silence. "Sir Kenneth of White Harbor," he said when asked, and in the saying of the harbor name there was the faint salt of homesickness. He had a way of taking a hit with the easy yielding of a man who had seen snow taught. He took pain into himself without letting pride turn it into a second pain. "My lord's worst decision," he said after a long breath, "was to believe his enemy would come by the road he himself would have used. I put men in the trees by the wrong road, and we found we were on the right one after all." Jaime set these 3 names on their own sheet and handed it to the king the next morning. Stannis signed without smile or sermon. "You will have them in white tomorrow," he said. "Make the oath sound like it is older than the men saying it, because it is." The city, which had been waiting to find a thing to mutter about, chose the parade for its gossip. By mid-morning, the street of steel had feet upon it, and the street of sisters had become a sister's listening ear, and the great sept steps had men standing upon them who had sworn to spit upon Aralor, and men standing beside them who wore red strings under their sleeves and swore to spit upon spittle. The bells did not ring. Stannis would have them ring for victory when victory was not yet done. But the people rang their own noise with their mouths. Jaime stood with his 3, and with the remnants of the old white, who looked at him with expressions that ranged from gratitude to suspicion, to the blank watchfulness of men waiting to see which way a thrown spear would turn in the wind. He had cut 2 cloaks, and the men under them had learned how to live without white. The rest had bent enough to stay, and would need straightening, not breaking. He set them where the line would be strongest and took his place at the head. When they stepped off, the sound that came from the crowd was not a cheer, not a boo. Something like the intake of breath a crowd takes when it judges a tightrope walker's first step. Jaime moved without hurry. He let the white cloak trail the smallest degree over his left hand, so that the gold would not catch too much lamplight and become a spectacle. He did not look for faces he knew, because a man who looks for one face in a crowd will stumble on the stone under his foot. He looked straight ahead and watched with the edge of his sight. Halfway down the street of Flower, a boy with mortar on his hands threw a stone. It was a baker's stone, rounded and honest, and it came like a pigeon, unremarkable and intent. Jaime saw it and did not lift his hand to catch it. He turned his shoulder, and it struck his cloak, and hung for a beat, and fell. He did not stop. The boy's eyes widened as if he had committed murder and been forgiven. The crowd's breath released in the sound of men coughing and women saying quiet to children. That was the only stone. It would not be the last, but it was the only one today. They reached the great septi and turned, not to enter. Jaime had chosen the steps of the Red Keep south gate for the oath. The sept was full of its own quarrels, and he would not lend the White Sword Tower's oath to one side or the other. On the steps, under the blank eyes of carved kings, the 3 knelt in their rain-dark cloaks and spoke the words. Sir Andry's voice was low and even, as if saying a thing he had thought about many nights by a small fire. Sir Harwood's voice had the break in it that men get when they have learned to shout across wind. Sir Kenneth's voice was not beautiful. It was steady. Men in the crowd who had not thought they cared found they were listening as if for their own names. When it was done, no one cheered. Stannis did not care for cheering. Men breathed. The rain ticked. A bell far away marked the hour. Jaime looked at the 3 and saw that they had not been made different by the saying of the words. He knew enough not to be disappointed. Oaths were not candles. They did not change the shape of a room when lit. They were more like stones set into a wall. They made a shape you could lean your weight upon later. After, he sent Harwood to the watchhouse by the fish market with orders to empty it of officers who had become their own law. He sent Andry to the street of Silk with instructions to measure the distance between gold and violence and cut it shorter. He kept Kenneth by him, because a northern eye upon the city would see the places where hunger changed shape when it met pride. With Kenneth at his side, he walked the King's Gate quarter as the light faded to that yellowed hour when boys dare and old men remember. The rain had ceased. The cobbles shone like coins from a story told by a grandmother who wanted a child to stop crying. They came upon a knot of red-robed acolytes and 7-pointed star men nose to nose in a lane so narrow, even breathing was a grievance. The argument had reached that pitch where men no longer cared what it had begun with. only that it continue. You have no right to preach on this corner, a youth with a star pinned crookedly to his breast shouted, his cheeks blotched with earnestness. It is ours. It is Orelor's, a man in red said. Older, his beard wet and tangled, his eyes bright with a kind of fever that was not entirely illness. He set it here when the world was made. And the seven said it too, said a woman from a doorway. Not a zealot, just tired of noise. Set it in your houses, why don't you? And leave the street for sleeping. The shove came not from faith but from habit. A hand pushed, another answered. One zealot tripped on a broken flag, and in falling took two with him, and the line between words and blood trembled. Hold, Jaime said. The word like a plank slapped against a table. He did not shout. He stepped into the space that was trying to become a fight, and made it a room instead. Hold, he said again, and took the star from the youth's chest without asking and pinned it straight. If you cannot wear your own god square, he said, do not try to square another man's. The boy stared at the repinned star, as if it had become heavy. Kenneth moved with him like a man who had carried a shield before. He put his hand gently on the older red man's shoulder. Go home, he said, in a voice that did not say which home. The road will still be here in the morning. You are cold men, the red man murmured. But he went. The boy with the star looked as if he wanted to say something about warmth and truth. Jaime's face did not invite it. The lane exhaled. The city resumed its patience. They returned by way of the Godswood, such as the Red Keep allowed itself. The ironwood leaves were like coins hammered thin. The weirwood was no true heart tree, no red sap, no face carved. Just a pale-barked tree planted by Targaryens who had thought it handsome to borrow another god's bones and make a garden from them. Even here, where the air was green and damp, and the smell of wet earth wiped away the iron of the cells, the keep remembered itself and stood with its back to the hill, like a man who suspects his friend's humor will turn at any moment. There, under the pale tree, they found Shireen. She had a shawl around her shoulders and Patchface sat cross-legged at her feet, his bells muted by the wet. The girl looked up with the exact look of a child not surprised to find the adults she respects in the places where they belong. Sir Jaime, she said. Sir Kenneth. She had learned names quickly, as if making a map. My lady, Jaime said. Patchface raised his head and shook himself, and a very small sound came from the bells, like rain through silk. The crabs go sideways, sideways, Patchface sang softly. But the kings go up and down. Up comes the gold, down goes the crown. Shireen frowned. He is like that, she said apologetically. I have known worse rhymes, Jaime said. He had. At times, the court had been nothing but rhyme. He watched the girl place a finger on the page of her book to hold her place. Do you study when you could be warm? Warm makes me sleepy, Shireen said. If I sleep too much, the day ends before I am done with it. A sound tactic, Kenneth murmured, surprising Jaime into a glance. Northern humor can be so dry a man does not know he has drunk until his throat has stopped burning. Lady, if you will pardon us, we will take the longer path so that your night does not fill with men who have forgotten how to be quiet. Shireen nodded solemnly, as if granting a petition in a smaller court. Jaime thought of daughters and was careful not to let the thought have a face. Patchface watched them go with a look that might have been sad, or might have been a reflection of rain on his painted cheek. Under the sea, he hummed, the swords go rust. Up in the air, the words go dust. The cells called to him that night more insistently than before. There are doors that gain a voice if you pass them often enough. Their wood speaks in your ear until you begin to hear words where there are none. Jaime went down with the purpose of walking by without pausing. A purpose is a horse that throws you sometimes. He stopped with his hand on the cool iron of the latch and did not turn it. Do you intend to stand there all night and instruct the door in virtue? Said a voice behind him. Dry as old reeds. Maester Coleman. No, that was the Eyrie. This one had come with Stannis' appointment, an older man with a suet-soft face and a mind like a whetstone. He held a lamp that did the cells no kindness. Or will you behave in a way that will permit me to write fewer prescriptions for indigestion? I am considering, Jaime said. Consider in motion, the maester advised. A thought that is not moving becomes a pond. Ponds breed midges and self-pity. You give physic to mind and belly. The one disturbs the other. The maester said. If you go in, you will be the worse for it. If you do not go in, you will be the worse for it. I know of no draught that cures a man of being two men at once. Bend shall. Jaime took his hand from the latch. In the cell beyond, silence changed shape, which is to say the person within moved. He could feel the air of her life through the iron. It stung him as if a small arrow had pricked his skin. He went up, step by step, until the smell of wet iron thinned into the smell of lamp oil and damp tapestry. In the morning, Tommen watched the parade rehearsals from an upper balcony of Maegor's hold fast with a gravity that belonged to a boy who has learned that silence may be looked at as guilt or as courage, depending on who does the looking. A jailer stood at a tactful distance. The boy's hair, not so golden as poems had painted it, lay damp on his forehead. He had Circe's mouth when he tried not to cry. Shireen stood beside him with her book, and a walnut she had not cracked. Jaime kept his eyes forward, because a man who guards must not look like a man who wants. But his heart, that traitor, stuttered with the irregular rhythm of an old wound when pressed wrong. Later, Davos came to him with a map. It was a poor map. The city is a beast that will not be cleanly drawn. But Davos had marked with a sure hand the warehouses where grain had been hoarded by men who claimed virtue with their lips and counted coin with their thumbs. We can break these, Davos said. We must do it in a way that does not teach the city to break what it wants when it wants it. If we turn the people loose on these doors, they will remember the breaking more than the bread. Thou. Law, Jaime said. The king will have us measure it until the measuring becomes a habit. That is the hope, Davos said. Hope is a plank we lay across a gap not yet bridged. He tapped a warehouse by the Dragon Gate. This one belongs to a man who gave your sister wine and called it grace. The queen knew where he kept his other graces. It is a neat providence that we can pull both weeds with one hand. They did the work brutally and politely. Polite, because they paid the man for what they took at a price set by a council who did not like him. And brutal because two of his clerks thought they could set a lamp to a spilled sack and make an argument about justice burn bright enough to be remembered, and so made themselves fools. Jaime took the lamp from the clerk's hand and pinched the wick dead with his fingers. It blistered him. He held the hurt in with the same habit he used to hold in words. By evening the bread had moved. Men ate. Women fed children. The house of the hoarder stood like a stripped tree. In a lane nearby, a man in red and a woman with a star spoke quietly in the same shadow, and did not attempt to murder one another with scripture. It was not peace. It was the day, held together by decisions made in time. On the seventh day, when the three new whites had slept in their tower beds, and Harlan had praised Harwood twice, and Henry had taken a cut on his thigh, without cursing, and Kenneth had written his name in the book with a hand that made letters as square as a northern house, Jaime went again to the king. Melisandre stood behind Stannis like a flame seen at the corner of the eye. Davos had a salt stain on his sleeve as if he had leaned against his past without meaning to. We have held the city, Stannis said, looking at a list that would not accept flattery. Now we must hold the realm. The reach gathers. Dorne writes letters with smiles around them. The Vale thinks itself a country. The Riverlands argue with the Riverlands, as is their custom. He lifted his eyes, and they were the color of water under a storm. The queen will have her trial. The boy will have his sentence. He's no king. He may be made useful. Send him to the wall, Davos said quietly. If men must pay for their father's follies, let them pay in cold and a long life. Stannis' mouth twitched as if at a taste he had not expected. We shall see, he said. Ace for the queen. The faith is loud, and the red priesthood is not quiet either. I will not have war of gods in my streets. You will stand between them with your men and make of that line a law. You will hold until the holding becomes obedience. Jaime saw it then, the path laid out in that dry voice. Days like this one followed by more of them, not glorious, not sung, but useful as bread. He had known hunger in a different house. The work promised him a sort of meal. He bowed his head and felt the pull of the cloak as a reminder and as a gift. On their way out, Melisandre matched his stride without seeming to walk faster. "You will be tested," she said, not as a threat, not as a promise. Merely naming whether that would come whether a man believed in it or not. A door will open. It will open not because you knock, but because you are a man who stands near doors. If you pass through, you will be burned. If you do not, you will be burned. There are fires that take and fires that temper. Ben Chao. You speak as if you like watching men in flames, Jaime said, tired and incapable of finding elegance to hide behind. I like watching light, she said. How it reveals. How it humiliates. How it blesses. You can call it what you like. I will call it trouble, he said. That is a true word for many true things. She answered, and her rubies winked as if they had their own sight. The trial was set for the 9th day. The Septon, who had scoured his cheeks into piety, would preside with 6 others in pale cloth, because the faith will always put a number to its indignation. A red priest named Barros, brought by Melisandre from the river like driftwood with a taste for sermon, would attend with a cluster of embers and the certainty of the newly convinced. The hall would be the throne room, not the sept, at the king's insistence. Law must be spoken where the crown sat, he had said. Because it is there that law is mistaken for whim most easily. Jaime walked the lines of men who would bar the doors and keep the gallery and stand between zeal and zeal. He spoke to Harwood about how to allow shouting but not shoving. He spoke to Andry about how to take a man's wrist without looking like you had taken his god. He spoke to Kennett about how to know when a man is about to cry and when he is about to stab. He had learned these things in other rooms for other reasons. It pleased him, against his will, to use them here. On the 8th night, with the city holding its breath in expectation of a spectacle it hoped would be someone else's trouble, a message found him where he sat with the book. Not a letter this time. A boy with a mouth like a cut and eyes like a hungry cat's. She asks again, the boy said. She says if you come now, it will cost you less later. Everything costs more later, Jaime said, and heard how his voice made philosophy into an old man's consolation. He watched the boy's face and saw nothing there but the desire to be paid for the errand. He gave the boy a copper and watched him weigh it with 2 fingers, as if it might change shape if he looked hard enough. He went down the stairs he had avoided. The jailer raised his eyebrows and then lowered them, as a man will do when his work has taught him to let other men err as they please. The key grated in the lock. Iron speaks the same word wherever it is asked to turn. She stood when he entered. She had arranged herself for that moment, as he had known she would. The hair was clean. The gown was a white that mocked his, and did not surpass it. The mouth was the mouth he knew, and it had found a way to soften without seeming to beg. The eyes were a pair of windows in a house he had once lived in and burned. You took your time, Cersei said, and in that first moment, she was as she had always been, which is to say she had decided beforehand. How the conversation would begin, and she would shove it back onto. I had work, he said. You always have work now, she said, and moved closer, and the lamplight made more of her than the cell deserved. You are a man who has dressed his pride in duty and thinks it humble because it wears a plain cloak. Pride wears many cloaks, he said. It was not the reply she wanted. He could feel that in the minute closing of the skin at the corners of her eyes. He remembered those eyes better than he remembered the way sunlight had looked on the golden tooth when he was a boy. You are to stand between me and the men who have decided to drag me into the dirt, she said. You are to stand there without moving, like a wall that remembers it was once a tree. Her voice warmed. They think they can make stories about me. You know better stories. You can tell them where to put their lies and how to speak my truth. My truth, he said quietly, and the lamp hissed as if a stray drop of rain had found it, is not yours. For a moment, she was the girl from Casterly Rock again, with a temper like a harebell in wind, bending, not breaking. Then the Tempter found a stick to hit, and her mouth hardened on a word she did not say. "You would let them tear me," she said. "You, who have pulled me out of fires, would let me burn because your new king hates that I am warmer than his law. When I pulled you from a fire," he said, and there were the ghosts again, green and laughing. "I afterward discovered that I had put myself in another that I did not see. You always loved your cleverness," she said. "Men mistook it for beauty because of your face." She stepped close enough to smell like the wine they had both accepted as religion when younger. "I am your sister," she said. "I am the mother of your—" She stopped, not because the word was wrong, but because it was too right to be safe in that room. "You will not let them. You will not." He looked, finally, full at her, and let the sight cut him where it would. He remembered a small boy with a toy stag. He remembered a girl he had not fathered sent to Dorne like a promise tied with ribbon. He remembered his own face in a mirror when he had been proud of the thing that had cut Eris, and ashamed of the thing that had loved a woman who had taught him how to lie as a route to truth. He reached and set his golden hand on the iron bars, and there was the little clean clink. "I will let the law be law," he said. Saying it aloud made it heavier, as if words are sand, and you must carry them too. "I will not let the Red and the Seven turn your trial into their sermon. I will not let men make of this a riot. I will stand so that shoving turns back when it meets me. I will be a door. Beyond that, I cannot be your cleverness. I have spent it all on myself." "You are cruel," she said very soft. "You become more like father in each hour." "I become more like a man who remembers that his hands are not clean," he said, and lifted the gold to show her what he had instead. "Look. You asked me to come. I came. I did not come to be made again into what I was when coming at your word was the same as breathing." She stood a long time without speaking. When she did, it was with a voice from a place he did not visit often. "If they send me to a silent place, will you come there again?" she asked. "Not to argue, to say a word I will choose. If I think the word will not break me," he said. "If I think I can stand, then you will not come." She said without rancor, and sat on the cot with a composed smallness that was more dangerous than her temper. "Go. Sir Lord Commander, be the wall and the book and the law. I will be the woman you do not write about." He left before the lamp could gutter and make a darkness that would suggest something poetic. In the stair he found himself breathing like a man who had come up out of deep water. The maester was not there to prescribe a draught to make him sleep. The night did not require sleep. It required standing. In the morning men lined the hall. The air held that whispering dryness that comes before great rains or great speeches. Jaime set the white at the doors and along the pillars and at the foot of the throne, and he placed himself between the two groups of men who believed they spoke for gods. The Septons came with their books, and the Red with their coals, and the king with his face that had taught itself how to be stone without becoming stupid. Davos stood where he could catch Jaime's eye and say with a mouth that did not move that help would come from a certain door if help were needed. Shireen sat in a balcony with her book in a walnut, the shell now cracked neatly in half and the meat taken out in one piece. They brought Cersei in, and the room made a sound like silk being torn. Some men stood because they had learned to stand when a queen enters. Some because they liked standing to make themselves taller. She did not bow. She did not hiss. She stood as if waiting for a painting to be finished. The Septon began with a prayer that made of words a barricade behind which men hid their fear that they had invited a lioness into their henhouse. The Red Man hummed very softly to his coals, as a man hums to a dog to make it sleep. Jaime did not listen to the litany as story. He listened to it as work. When a man shouted from the gallery, he let the sound swell and then die without giving it a body. When a woman began to sob and then turned the sob into a chant, he moved Harwood 2 paces to the left so that the chant ran into a chest instead of into more mouths. When the Red Man lit his little brazier, he took 2 steps toward it and then 2 steps away, and the Red Man smiled as if recognizing that he too knew the game called drawing a line. Cersei spoke when given leave and turned the leave into a platform. She had not lost that. She made of herself a woman wronged by rumor, and a mother wronged by law, and a lioness wrongly caged. She looked nowhere near Jaime. It was a skill he had taught her when they were young, and their talent was not yet sharpened into weaponry. How to make a room believe your eye was upon it, while your gaze rested upon the place beyond the room where your true argument lay. In the end, belief did not rule. Law, as Stannis measured it, did. The sentence was not death. Stannis does not waste for the sake of spectacle, and Davos would not wear a hand's brooch if he could not look at his own daughter after such a show. It was confinement while other matters were judged. Accounting for coin taken and coin moved. Testimonies heard without torches. The faith was sullen, and the red were only moderately satisfied, which meant the line had held in the one place where satisfaction is dangerous. After, when the hall had emptied into the city like a tide, and the men in white had counted one another with their eyes, and found no one missing, Jaime went to the book and added 2 lines that were not about deeds but about keeping. Then he closed it and stood, and found that he was shaking very slightly. The tremor at the edge of a man's strength, after he has held something in place a long time. Harlan found him thus and did not remark upon it. Harwood wants permission to train the watch with staves in the morning, the Tarthman said. He says men who learn the weight of wood will hit fewer skulls than men who only think steel is an answer. Give it, Jaime said, and steadied his hand upon the table's edge where Harlan could not see. Sir Andry has moved 3 of the worst men off Silk Street, and into the ditches where their knuckles will be use enough. Thank him, and tell him to keep his hand light on women who cannot pay their debts with coin. Sir Kenneth has had a thought about the Mudgate, Harlan added, a faint humor bending his voice. He thinks a cord across the inner steps, at ankle height, will stop men from running and make them think, and men who think bump their heads less often. Let him set it, Jaime said, and smiled despite his tremor. The small devices save cities. When Harlan had gone, Jaime stood a little longer and then went out into the long light. The rain had taken a rest. The sky above the city had that scrubbed look a good wife gives a kitchen before setting bread to rise. He walked until the walls were at his right and the river at his left, and the smell of tar spoke of ships not yet mended. Children ran ahead of him and then stopped and pretended not to have been running. A girl balancing a basket on her head set it down and peered at his hand with a seriousness that made him want to hide it and show it in the same instant. Patchface was there too, of course, as if the city had invited him to every scene, and he had obligingly come. He jingled once, then held the bell still with 2 fingers, turning solemn for reasons that likely belonged to his own weather. He clinks. He clanks. He sang very soft, as if not to wake anyone. He holds the ranks. The day goes on and eats its thanks. Do you ever sing sense? Jaime asked him, not unkindly. Sense sinks, Patchface replied, and then more quietly, Jaime considered that a man who has stood in a hall and held 2 gospels apart might allow that both statements could be true. Night found him again in the book room, where the candlelight made the ink seem blacker and the blank spaces more daring. He turned back pages with his left hand until he found a life that had not been famous. Sir Lewin Martell had a fine page. That would not soothe him, because the end of his line shortened too suddenly at the trident. Better to choose a man who had done the work no one wrote songs about. Sir Addison Hill, Sir Theo Wilsay, men who had stood and stood and stood. He read what was there, and then he looked at the blank at the bottom of his own page, and understood something he had not before. That the worth of a man's line might be counted in the steadiness of the script used to write another's. He did not open the door that called his name like an old song you should not dance to when your bones ache. He slept. The bells argued with gulls in the morning, as they will always do in this city. The fish market smelled of honest rot. The gold cloaks lined up their boots, and the oil lay upon them like care. And on the king's table lay letters from Dorne, each folded with grace, and edged in courtesy like knives whose blades are too clean to have been idle. We will answer those, Stannis said, tapping a knuckle on the topmost letter. with ships and with the kind of courtesy that ends arguments rather than begins them. You will keep the city while I remind the realm that I did not come to this chair to watch it be gnawed. Menawand. Davos looked toward the window and then back to the list he had made. If you will have my counsel, he said, take the ships that can sail and leave the ones that cannot. The sea is a judge that takes bribes from no man. Your counsel is taken, Stannis said, a statement that in his mouth was praise. The Lord Commander will keep the crown and the law whole. If the boy is to go to the wall, the proper men must be set to take him. If he is to be made a ward in some house, where the name Lannister is not a flag, we will see it done. For now, he reads with my daughter, which is a better use of any prince's hour than most princes have found. Dan? Jaime felt the world tilt very slightly at that, the way a ship does when a wave it did not see reaches under it and lifts. He said nothing, because saying a thing can throw it in the air, and then you must watch where it lands. When he left the presence chamber, Melisandre was in the passage, her hand resting upon the stone. Her rubies dark as if the blood in them had decided on a silence. You will be pulled, she said. It is the nature of men made to hold. Remember that a bow is useless if it is always bent. And if it is always unstrung? He asked. It is then a piece of wood, she said, and smiled. And for once the smile did not make him want to turn away. Go, Lord Commander. Find a way to be both. He went to the yard and set his feet and took up the waster. The day had the bright, hard light of a coin hammered thin. The rain would come again, as it always did, as it must. And between rains men did their work. He struck, parried, turned his shoulder. The ache came, faithful as a dog. The city breathed. The white cloak pulled. The book waited. The door at the bottom of the stair remembered his palm. The king measured. The hand balanced. The red woman watched. The girl read. The boy learned to be quiet in a way that did not make quiet a wound. The realm shifted on its own weight. He stood where the standing mattered and made of himself a thing that could hold.